Welcome to Modern Domestic's virtual Bernina machine owner class. I'm Erica, and in part 7, we're going to dive into some of the stitches your machine can do. First, let's review how to select and change your stitches in stitch settings. The machine is going to power on in the straight stitch. To change to an alternate stitch, you can scroll or you can use the transition button to view additional stitches within a menu. Just press to select the one that you want. If you want to adjust your stitch width, you're going to use your multifunction knob. It's the top knob on the front of your machine. Or you can tap the number on screen and use the slider or use the plus minus buttons to make changes. To clear your changes, just hit the yellow bounded box. The same goes for the length. You can use the second knob on the front of your machine, or you can press the number and use the slider or the plus minus buttons and then hit the yellow bounded box. If you've made changes to length and width and you want to clear both, just hit your clear button. Next, we're going to talk about securing stitches. For all of the stitches I'm going to talk about in this section, I highly recommend that you try them on your own machine. I've provided a list of supplies needed for each stitch, so you can always pause the video and go gather them, or you can come back at a later time and try them out. For securing stitches, you're going to need 2 pieces of quilting cotton or something similar. Cut them to 4 inches by 6 inches. You're going to need an 80-12 universal needle. You need polyester or cotton thread. You want your needle in the center position, and then you want to have your reverse pattern foot, the number 1, 1C, or 1D, depending on your machine. There are several ways to secure your stitches that are built into your machine. The most common is to use any stitch with the quick reverse button. You're going to position your fabric, stitch a few stitches forward, and then hold down the quick reverse button to stitch over what you've just sewn. Release the button and then continue to sew your seam all the way down to the end, and then repeat the same process in order to lock your stitches at the end. The securing program stitch, which is stitch number 5, has an automatically built-in lock stitch. Begin sewing, and after a few stitches forward, the machine will automatically reverse. When you get to the end of your seam, press reverse once and it will stitch the predetermined number of stitches in place to lock your stitch. The quilter's securing program, which is either stitch number 1324 or 1301, depending on your machine, does 6 very close together stitches to start, and then when you get to the end of your seam, you're going to touch the reverse button and it's going to sew those same set of securing stitches at the end. This is a great, less bulky alternative for securing your stitch. Next, let's talk about pivoting. Practicing pivoting is a great way to get used to your freehand system or to the hover feature on your machine. For pivoting, you're going to need 2 pieces of quilting cotton cut to 4 by 6, an 80-12 universal needle, polyester or cotton thread, your needle in the center position, and your reverse pattern foot number 1, 1C, or 1D. On your machine, go ahead and set your needle to end in the down position. Then go to the settings menu and set your presser foot to hover. You're going to begin sewing, and you're going to use the hover feature or move the freehand system with your knee in order to raise the presser foot and pivot periodically. So sew a couple inches forward and then do a pivot and just keep practicing that. The freehand system also releases the needle tension, so be sure that you're not accidentally continually pressing the freehand system with your knee as you're trying to sew. Both methods, hover and freehand system, make it easy to position your fabric where you need it. Let's move on to the triple straight stitch. This stitch is great for creating a reinforced seam and also works really well for top stitching. You can create the look of a heavier top stitching thread just by using this stitch with regular all-purpose thread. To practice this stitch, you'll need some quilting cotton or denim and cut it to 4 by 6. You want an 80-12 universal needle and polyester or cotton thread. And then I recommend using both the reverse pattern foot and the edge stitch foot if you have it for this. And you're going to select stitch number 6. Select stitch number 6 and begin to sew. You'll notice that this stitch has a nice forward and backward motion. So the way this stitch works is that it's going to sew 2 stitches forward and then 1 back, so it's continually sewing over itself, which results in a really strong seam. and it gives the thread the appearance of being thicker because there are 3 layers of it on a single stitch. After you've sewn your seam, go ahead and switch out to the number 10 edge stitch foot. If you don't have this foot, I highly recommend it. It makes edge stitching and top stitching extremely easy and is a really useful foot. You're going to open up the fabric you just sewed with the seam allowance to the right, and you're going to line it up so that the fold of the fabric of your seam is going to be right next to the guide of the foot. Move your needle over to the right and then begin to sew. And you'll see this created a beautiful looking top stitch. The next stitch we're going to talk about is the very overlock stitch. To practice this stitch, you're going to need 2 pieces of quilting cotton or interlock knit, which is a more stable knit, cut to approximately 4 by 6, an 80-12 universal needle, polyester or cotton thread, overlock foot number 2 or 2A, and then you're going to select stitch number 3. The very overlock stitch comes in handy when you want to finish the edge on woven fabrics or create an overlock seam with stretch on a knit. This stitch can be a useful alternative if you don't have a serger. You're going to select the stitch number 3, and then you're going to grab your number 2 or 2A foot. This foot has a stitch finger which will pull your thread over the raw edge of your fabric, finishing the edge. When you put this foot on and line up your fabric, you're going to make sure to line up the raw edge of the fabric directly under the stitch finger. As the stitching starts, you can see the needle will swing over the stitch finger, and this is going to help maintain the flatness of the seam as well as allowing the seam to still have some stretch once it's sewn. Now let's move on to the blind hem stitch. For this one, you'll need 2 pieces of wool-like fabric or heavy flannel cut to 4 by 6, an 80-12 universal needle, polyester or cotton thread, your blind stitch foot number 5, and then you're going to select stitch number 9. If you have a project where you don't want the hem stitches to be visible, like on drapery or pants or a skirt, use stitch number 9 with the blind stitch foot number 5. This foot has a 5.5 millimeter needle opening, but you can use it with any Bernina machine. To prepare your fabric for a blind hem, the first thing you'll do is finish the edge you're hemming using a serger or your overcast stitch on your machine. Then you're going to fold the hem up and press in place. And then the next step is to base the hem about 1/4 inch or 3/8 of an inch from the overcast edge. You might be tempted to skip this step, but it's really one of the secrets to getting a perfect blind hem. You're going to fold the project back over the basting so that the finished edge is exposed. And then you'll see as you sew, the needle is going to stitch on this edge, and then every few stitches it's going to take a bite out of that fold. As you sew, you want to make sure that you're using your left hand to push the fold toward the guide of the foot, and that is really one of the secrets to making sure you get a perfect blind hem. Lastly, we're going to talk about the stretch stitch. To practice this stitch, you'll need 2 pieces of knit fabric. I recommend a jersey or interlock or even spandex, and you're going to cut it to 4 by 6. You want an 80-12 universal ballpoint or stretch needle, and then you want polyester or cotton thread, and then you're going to use your reverse pattern foot number 1, 1C, or 1D, and you're selecting stitch number 11. Go ahead and select stitch number 11. The narrow zigzag replicates a straight stitch, yet builds plenty of stretch into the seam and prevents the seams from popping when stretched. Begin stitching, and if you notice the fabric beginning to push or stretch, adjust your presser foot pressure. If you have a machine with dual feed, make sure it's engaged, or you can use a walking foot to help feed the fabric through more evenly. When you've finished, you'll notice the seam has plenty of stretch. Thanks for watching this video. In part 8, we will talk about how to clean and oil your machine.